So imagine a massive global company consistently missing its financial targets year after year. Now imagine looking at the internal performance reviews for that exact same period and discovering that 96% of senior leadership was rated as fully achieving or even exceeding expectations.
Yeah, I mean, that 96% statistic, it really just tells you everything you need to know about what they're up against right now.
It really does. Today, we are unpacking Sodexo's Shift and Grow 2030 Investor Update. We're looking at a global titan in food and facilities management that is, well, publicly admitting to historical underperformance and rolling out a massive transformation roadmap to fix it.
Right. And the central question we're analyzing today for potential investors is pretty straightforward. Is Sodexo's 2030 roadmap, which, anchors heavily on hitting over 5% organic growth and over 5% operating margins, is that a credible, value-creating blueprint for long-term shareholder value?
Exactly. Or, on the flip side, are we looking at a highly precarious transition, weighed down by dangerous execution complexities and, honestly, massive near-term capital expenditures? I'll be arguing that this strategic shift is actually a masterclass in disciplined capital allocation.
Well, I'm sure you will.
I will. Because they are directly addressing the root causes of their operational drift through precise procurement integration, aggressive North American expansion, and forcing a complete culture shift around accountability.
And I'll be taking the position that, sure, while acknowledging the problem is a great first step, surviving the cure is another matter entirely. When you look at the fiscal risks, ballooning leverage, 400 million euros in organizational restructuring costs, it's a lot.
It is a heavy lift, yeah.
Right, plus a staggering 600 million euro technology overhaul. The operational friction is just immense. Trying to rebuild a historically complacent culture while integrating a highly fragmented supply chain makes those 5% growth targets incredibly fragile, in my view.
I think to really evaluate the credibility of the plan, we have to start with how they're completely changing their strategic framing. Historically, Sodexo tried to be everything to everyone, everywhere.
Yeah, the classic lack of focus.
Exactly, and that lack of focus is exactly what diluted their margins. What stands out to me about the 2030 roadmap is the structural honesty. They aren't promising an overnight fix here.
No, they definitely are not.
Right. They've explicitly outlined phases for scaling global model adoption. Fiscal 2026 and 2027 are entirely dedicated to a heavy financial reset and rebuilding the foundation. It's only in fiscal 2028 and beyond that they actually expect to scale.
But let's look at the reality of what that reset looks like for an investor. During this foundation building phase in fiscal 26, operating margins are projected to hit a floor of 3.2% to 3.4%.
Which they expected.
True. But in fiscal 27, organic growth is projected at a meager 2 to 3%. The cost of this transition requires roughly 1 billion euros in non-recurring incremental investments over the course of the plan. You're pushing debt leverage up to 2.6 to 2.8 times in fiscal 2027 just to fund the turnaround.
Wait, let me make sure I'm contextualizing this correctly. You're pointing to the leverage and the depressed margins as a sign of fragility. But aren't those depressed margins the literal mechanical result of them finally writing off the bad contracts and taking the necessary restructuring hits?
Well, yes.
I mean, they are intentionally absorbing the pain now rather than just kicking the can down the road again.
Yes, they're absorbing the pain, but the risk to fiscal growth is whether they can actually handle the simultaneous shock to their system. You're talking about ripping out deep-seated organizational complexity, while at the exact same time trying to accelerate net new business to 3%.
Right.
It's just an incredible amount of stress to place on an organization that, as we established, has historically lacked operational rigor.
That actually brings us perfectly to how they plan to drive that net new business, specifically their commercial strategy and the North American market. Growth requires an engine, right?
Of course.
And Sodexo has identified the $75 billion addressable market for large accounts in the U.S. as their primary catalyst. They're increasing their North American sales team by 30%. But more importantly, they are fundamentally changing how they price.
You're talking about moving from cost-plus to price-to-win.
Exactly. They are moving from a cost-plus pricing model to a price-to-win strategy.
Right. And we should probably explain why that shift matters. In a traditional cost-plus model, you figure out what the food and labor will cost, slap a standard margin on top, and hand the client the bill.
Very safe.
Safe, but totally uncompetitive from massive, complex global bids. Price to win means you analyze the exact competitive thresholds required to win a major account. You bid that exact number, and then you force your own internal operations to find the efficiencies to make that margin work.
Exactly. It forces operational discipline. And we have immediate proof of concept that this unified global model actually works. Look at their recent Meta contract win.
Oh yeah, the Meta deal.
Yeah, they were selected to deliver workplace food services across 130 locations in over 30 countries. Meta launched one of the most competitive global bids in the industry, and Sodexo won it. Plus, 50% of their new wins right now are first-time outsourcers.
Wow, 50%?
Yeah, they aren't just stealing market share from competitors. They are tapping into completely unpenetrated markets.
Look, the Meta win is a fantastic headline, no doubt. But I don't think it automatically proves the model is scalable without massive friction. Let's dig into the mechanics of securing and servicing these large global accounts.
Okay, let's do it.
These clients demand intense upfront capital. If you look at the plan, Sodexo's CapEx is rising to 2.5% to 3% of revenues.
Right, which makes sense for the scale.
But why? Because when you win a Meta, you are often physically building out the operational infrastructure, the industrial kitchens, the tech integration, the logistics hubs, all before you serve a single meal.
I see the upfront cost, sure, but the return on capital employed is targeted at over 15%. And that's precisely because these massive contracts offer long-term scale and stability once that infrastructure is built.
Assuming the macro environment cooperates, of course. Let's look at another one of their target segments, hyperscaler data centers. Securing those contracts means managing the construction phase and then transitioning to the operational phase.
Which is a huge pivot.
It is. You're taking a site that might have 3,000 construction workers needing heavy logistics, housing, mass feeding, and then a year later, it shrinks to 300 highly specialized white-collar engineers who want a premium cafe experience.
Right.
Managing that pivot requires incredibly agile operations. You're facing off against entrenched, aggressive global competitors in a market where Sodexo's actively trying to play catch-up.
See, I'm really glad you brought up the data center construction to operation pivot, because it highlights what I think is a massive unrecognized competitive advantage for them.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Sodexo has decades of deep expertise in managing remote sites and logistical villages for the energy and resources sector. Think about mining camps in the middle of nowhere.
Okay, fair point.
Managing housing, feeding, and logistics for thousands of contractors in harsh, isolated environments is quite literally in their DNA. So when you talk about the complex logistics of building a data center in a remote area, isn't Sodexo actually uniquely positioned to dominate that exact phase?
I mean, the remote site DNA is an asset for the construction phase, yes. But standardizing that localized expertise into a unified global offering for a tech hyperscaler is a very different beast.
It takes work, yes.
And that friction of standardization brings us right into their operations and procurement overhaul. The entire mathematical premise of this 5% margin target relies on ripping out decentralized layers of management.
The middle management purge?
Exactly. The investor update revealed that in some regions, Sodexo had up to 12 layers of management between a site-level employee and the regional CEO.
12 layers! I mean, if a site manager wants to adjust a menu to reflect local taste or, change a supplier, the request has to travel through 12 levels of approval.
Right.
It completely chokes the system. It creates a paralyzing lack of agility, which is exactly why stripping those layers out is a massive margin driver.
Sure. On a spreadsheet, removing middle management saves money, but flattening an organization that has operated that way for decades triggers severe structural disruption.
You think it'll be that chaotic?
I do. To fix this top-heavy pyramid, they are absorbing a €400 million restructuring cost across fiscal 26 and 27. My concern is whether they promise labor productivity gains will actually outpace the institutional chaos.
But that chaos is temporary.
Maybe, but when you cut that deep,
you risk losing the exact operational continuity and local client relationships that you are being paid to maintain in the first place.
I look at that 400 million euro restructuring completely differently. It's not just a penalty they're paying, it's a highly deliberate capital allocation decision. Leadership literally refers to complexity and time as the silent killers of growth.
Well, it's a catchy phrase.
But it's true. If you have a 100 million euro account that is suffocating under 4 layers of redundant regional management, paying the severance to remove those layers is a structural liberation.
Liberation is a strong word.
Because only when you clear that organizational cholesterol can the really big margin drivers like their procurement overhaul actually take effect.
Okay, let's talk about the procurement overhaul then, because this is where the execution risk gets incredibly high. They are attempting to merge Sodexo Supply with the Integre Group purchasing organization.
Which is arguably the most brilliant strategic move in the entire 2030 roadmap.
Really? The most brilliant?
Let me explain the mechanics of this for the listeners. By bringing their internal supply and the Integro GPO under one leadership roof, they're aggregating 7 billion euros in internal spend with over 38 billion in external member spend.
Yeah, it's a massive pool.
They are taking a highly fragmented purchasing system and turning it into a 45 billion euro centralized buying powerhouse.
Yes, volume aggregation drives lower unit costs. We all understand purchasing power.
But it's not just the purchasing power, it's the compliance. They've already rolled this out in pilot sites across North America. Instead of letting a local site manager start from a blank page and buy whatever ingredients they want from local vendors, the central system prescribes it.
It dictates the menus.
Exactly. It prescribes the menus and the exact ingredients to maximize that wholesale buying power. And the mechanical result? They are already seeing a 50 basis point margin uplift on those pilot sites.
That is significant, I'll admit.
That is 0.5% of pure profit dropping straight to the bottom line simply by enforcing procurement discipline.
I don't dispute the math. I dispute the human reality of implementing it. You're talking about enforcing strict compliance across 8,000 units in North America alone.
Right.
You have site managers and local chefs who are used to intense entrepreneurial flexibility. They like designing their own menus. They like sourcing local ingredients. Now you're forcing them into a rigid, prescribed corporate operational model.
But they work for a massive corporation.
True, but the cultural whiplash of taking away that autonomy creates immense friction. You've got a 400 million euro restructuring happening at the exact same time you're telling your ground-level operators they can no longer make their own purchasing decisions.
You keep coming back to this idea of cultural friction as a negative. But based on that staggering statistic we opened the show with, massive cultural friction is exactly what this company desperately needs.
You mean the 96% of senior leaders in APAC exceeding expectations while missing financial targets?
Right. They had completely normalized underperformance. They were running a culture of sympathy rather than accountability. They were defending bad numbers instead of addressing the root causes.
That's a fair assessment of the past.
And I argue that the credibility of this entire 2030 turnaround hinges on the fact that the new leadership is actively destroying that old culture. In North America alone, they replaced 15 senior leaders in the span of just 9 months.
Wow.
They brought in 10 external hires. They are explicitly aligning executive compensation directly with net new business and client retention. They are refusing to recycle underperformance.
Replacing leadership is the easy part, though. Servicing the immense technological debt those past leaders left behind is the hard part.
The tech debt is definitely real.
It's massive. The historical lack of centralization meant that regional managers were just buying whatever local IT solutions they wanted. The result? Sodexo was managing 2,000 completely fragmented local systems.
Right.
They didn't even have basic, real-time operational visibility into their own workforce allocation across different regions.
Which is why the roadmap includes a 500 to 600 million euro incremental investment in technology and data. They're building out their new platform, Sodexo Spark, and deploying unified ERPs, enterprise resource planning systems.
Exactly. And we need to be very clear about what that 600 million represents. This is not some visionary investment in cutting-edge differentiation. This is a desperate, urgent necessity just to catch up to baseline industry standards.
You don't think it's forward-looking?
Not fundamentally. When you're managing 2,000 disparate systems, you can't properly forecast, you can't seamlessly manage your supply chain,
And you certainly can't hit a 5% operating margin. This tech debt exposes just how far behind they allowed themselves to drift.
I totally hear you on the historical negligence, but let's look at the mechanical advantage of building this infrastructure right now. Yes, it costs $600 million, but because they're building it today, they get to bypass an entire generation of clunky legacy enterprise architecture.
So you're saying they leapfrog the old tech?
Precisely. They are building a system that is AI native by design. This isn't just patching holes. It's a massive value creation opportunity that moves their entire global footprint from reactive operations to predictive operations.
Okay, walk me through how predictive operations actually translates to a 5% margin in a cafeteria.
Absolutely. Let's look at what Sodexo Spark actually does mechanically. Through their Spark IQ platform, they've deployed over 5,000 IoT sensors in their facilities management contracts.
IoT sensors, okay?
Right, so instead of a janitorial team cleaning a massive corporate campus based on a fixed, rigid schedule cleaning empty rooms just because it's 2 p.m., the sensors track real-time room usage. The system dynamically directs labor only to the areas that actually need cooling, heating, or cleaning. Okay, demand-based maintenance is a proven efficiency, and it extends to the consumer side through Spark XP. They are aggressively rolling out frictionless retail environments. These are locations where consumers walk in, grab what they want, and walk out without ever standing in a checkout line. Right, like the Amazon Go model? Exactly. And the data shows this is generating a 15% increase in consumer spend per basket. Why? Because when you remove the physical friction of waiting in line, you remove the psychological barrier to impulse purchases. People just grab more. Yeah. People grab that extra $4 coffee or snack because there is zero penalty on their time. Furthermore, site managers who used to spend 2 to 3 days a month doing manual inventory ordering are now using AI forecasting to do it in a couple of hours. That is exactly how technology directly drives the labor productivity required to hit those 2030 targets.
The frictionless retail basket increase is a very solid data point. But rolling out a unified global ERP and a massive AI platform across 27,000 sites globally is a logistical mountain.
It is a massive undertaking.
Tech implementations of this scale are notoriously dangerous. They almost always suffer from budget overruns, operational blackouts, and massive resistance from the end users.
Well,
And when you combine this $600 million tech spend with the $400 million restructuring, and the heavy upfront capex for those new large accounts we talked about, you arrive at that 1 billion euros in non-recurring investments. That is why their leverage spikes to 2.8 times in 2027.
it's the cost of the rebuild.
But they're essentially maxing out the credit card to rebuild the entire engine of the company, hoping that by 2028, the machine magically hums at a 5% growth clip. If global market trends shift, if inflation spikes again, or if the macro environment tightens and corporate clients pull back on premium services, that debt leverage becomes very heavy very quickly.
But their strategy for shifting global market trends is exactly why they are targeting sectors with incredible resilience. They are deliberately pivoting their capital allocation toward segments where the cost of failure for the client is exceptionally high.
Right, making them indispensable.
Exactly. Which makes Sodexo an indispensable operational partner, not just a vendor. We talked about data centers, but look at their presence in airport lounges.
A highly premium complex segment.
Very complex. They operate over 180 lounges globally. Over the last 3 years, across all the volatility in the travel sector, they have maintained a 99% retention rate in that segment. 99%.
That is undeniably impressive. But how are they actually doing that?
They built specialized, premium capabilities, like their Sodexo Live Academy, which trains hospitality staff to a standard that airlines simply cannot replicate internally without massive cost.
So they outsource it.
The airlines outsource it because Sodexo does it better and cheaper. When you anchor your growth in high retention, high-value segments like aviation and healthcare, you actively insulate yourself from the macro volatility and inflation risks you're worried about.
I agree that the 99% retention in airport lounges is a massive strength. But airport lounges and data centers, while high growth, are still smaller slices of a massive global pie.
They are growing, though.
Sure, but the core volume of their business remains traditional corporate catering, healthcare, and education.
And in the U.S. education market, for example, leadership openly admitted during this update that they've suffered due to instability and losing contact with their clients.
Yeah, they did admit that.
Turning around a massive legacy university contract takes years of relationship rebuilding. It doesn't magically repair itself just because you installed a new AI inventory system or flattened the regional management structure.
And they acknowledge that, which is precisely why the very first pillar of their commercial growth engine isn't just about winning new business. It's entirely focused on proactive retention and account management. Proactive how? They've introduced dedicated retention rooms. Instead of waiting until a client issues a request for proposal, an RFP, they are building proactive renewal plans up to 2 years before a contract expires.
That is much earlier than industry standard.
Because they've realized that if you wait until the RFP is public, you've already lost the relationship. By the end of this calendar year, every single one of their top 200 strategic clients will have one clearly identified account manager with end-to-end accountability. No more 12 layers of management hiding who is actually responsible for the client. They are institutionalizing client proximity.
And institutionalizing that proximity is exactly what they must do if they want to survive this. But as we step back and look at the totality of this update, this is why I maintain my position on the inherent fragility of this transition.
The risks are too high for you.
I look at this roadmap and I see a deeply risky cure. The near-term years of 2026 and 2027 are going to carry an immense burden. They have to integrate 2,000 legacy tech systems into a unified global ERP. They have to absorb $400 million in organizational restructuring and fire layers of middle management.
Right.
They are pushing their debt leverage to 2.8 times, all while their operating margins sit at a depressed 3.2%. They're trying to aggressively root out a deeply complacent culture while simultaneously forcing 8,000 site managers to radically change how they procure food.
It is a lot of change at once.
It is. The sheer operational friction of executing all of those massive disruptive changes at the exact same time makes the path to a steady 5% organic growth and 5% operating margin highly precarious.
And when I summarize my position, I look at the exact same structural changes, and I see a company that is finally getting out of its own way. The 2030 plan is a masterclass in disciplined capital allocation and operational rigor.
If they can pull it off.
Sodexo is not hiding from its past underperformance. It's systematically dismantling the architecture that caused it by aggressively expanding in the $75 billion North American market, leveraging the $38 billion purchasing power of the Integra GPO to force margin discipline, and ruthlessly enforcing a high-performance culture. They are turning their massive global scale from a sluggish liability into a weapon.
It's a bold vision.
The fiscal 26 and 27 financial reset is not a weakness. It is a necessary calculated investment. It clears the organizational cholesterol so that by 2030, they're consistently driving over 5% organic growth and generating real long-term shareholder value.
Well, it seems we found significant common grounds on the reality that Sodexo's historical operational drift and that culture of defending bad numbers required a radical, unavoidable reset.
We definitely agree on that.
And we both look at the 99% retention rate in airport lounges and the push into the complex logistics of data centers and see incredibly prime high-value targets.
Absolutely.
Where we ultimately diverge is on the gravity of the transition itself. I see a timeline where the sheer weight of global standardization, debt leverage, and cultural friction could easily bog down those aggressive margin targets long before they ever reach 2030.
And I see an execution plan where removing 12 layers of management and standardizing procurement is the exact mechanism that frees the organization to finally hit those targets. It's a fascinating case study and turnaround strategy.
It really is.
It suggests that investors have much more to explore in how exactly Sodexo manages the day-to-day friction of its immediate fiscal 2026 reset. When you finally decide to rebuild a 60-year-old company from the inside out, the true test isn't the blueprint. The true test is whether the new engine fires up before the market leaves you behind.
Oh, let's see if they can navigate the turbulence.
We'll be watching. Thanks for joining us on The Debate.